Good good day, my brothers and my sisters. We're back for another reading of Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness. This book was written in 2010, but as we read, we see that it is still valid and it still applies even to this day. I would ask, if you do not have the book, please get the book. And as we go through the book, I will continue to read with you, with us. Again, this is for those of us who just don't get the chance to read. You can get the book and still listen to me read, as you continue to have the book, or you can just listen to the reading, because this book is so significant for the realities of what is going on in our society. It's like a warning that we need to adhere to. It's like a sound the alarm that we need to adhere to. So we're going to go into our episode, or our part 8 of our reading. Again, I'll finish the last paragraph of our last reading. Let's go right into it. The aim of this book, she says, the aim of this book is not to venture into the long-running, vigorous debate in the scholarly literature regarding what does and does not constitute a caste system. She says, I use the term racial caste in this book the way it is used in common parlance to denote a stigmatized racial group locked into an inferior position by law and custom. Jim Crow and slavery were caste systems. So is our current system of mass incarceration. Let us continue. And we're on page 12, and we are in at the last paragraph on page 12, if you have your books with you. She goes on to say, it may be helpful in attempting to understand the basic nature of the new caste system to think of the criminal justice system, the entire collection of institutions and practices that comprise it, not as an independent system, but rather as a gateway into a much larger system of racial stigmatization and permanent marginalization. This larger system, referred to here as mass incarceration, is a system that locks people not only behind actual bars in actual prisons, but also behind virtual bars and virtual walls. Walls that are invisible to the naked eye, but function nearly as effectively as Jim Crow laws once did at locking people of color into a permanent second-class citizenship. The term mass incarceration refers, hear this, not only to the criminal justice system, but also to the larger web of laws, rules, policies, and customs that control those labeled criminals, both in and out of prison. Once released, former prisoners enter a hidden underworld of legalized discrimination and permanent social exclusion. They are members of America's new undercaste. Hear this. The language of caste may well seem foreign or unfamiliar to some. Public discussions about racial caste in America are relatively rare. We avoid talking about caste in our society because we are ashamed of our racial history. We also avoid talking about race. We even avoid talking about class. Conversations about class are resisted in part because there is a tendency to imagine that one's class reflects upon one's character. What is the key to America's understanding of class is the persistent belief, despite all evidence to the contrary, that anyone with the proper discipline and drive can move from a lower class to a higher class. We recognize that mobility may be difficult, but the key to our collective self-image is the assumption that mobility is always possible. So failure to move up reflects on one's character. By extension, the failure of a race or ethnic group to move up reflects very poorly on the group as a whole. Hear this. What she says next is what is completely missed in the rare public debates today about the plight of African Americans is that a huge percentage of them are not free to move up at all. It is not just that they hear this. Let me read that again. What is completely missed in the rare public debates today about the plight of African Americans is that a huge percentage of them, a huge percentage, didn't say all, but a huge percentage of them are not free to move up at all. It is not just that they lack opportunity, attend poor schools, or are plagued by poverty. They are barred by law from doing so. And the major institutions with which they come into contact are designed to prevent their mobility. To put the matter starkly, the current system of control permanently locks a huge percentage of the African American community out of the mainstream society and economy. The system operates through our criminal justice institutions, but it functions more like a caste system than a system of crime control. Viewed from this perspective, the so-called underclass is better understood as an undercaste, a lower caste of individuals who are permanently barred by law and custom from mainstream society. I say that again. Viewed from the perspective, the so-called underclass is better understood as an undercaste, which is a lower caste of individuals who are permanently barred by law and custom from mainstream society. Although this new system of racialized social control purports to be colorblind, it creates and maintains racial hierarchy much as earlier systems of control did. Like Jim Crow and slavery, mass incarceration operates as a tightly networked system of laws, policies, customs, and institutions that operate collectively to ensure the subordinate status of a group largely defined by race. Of a group defined largely by race. That's page 13. We're going on to page 14. This just reminds me, and I don't want to do a lot of talking, of the song, of the words in that song by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five back in the early 80s, where they said the kid on the corner who just sold $10 worth of crack, he goes to jail for 10 years. But the white man that sold 10 ounces of cocaine, he gets out of jail, he gets out on bail, and out of jail, He said, that's the way it goes. Let's continue reading. This argument may be particularly hard to swallow given the election of Barack Obama. Many will wonder how a nation that just elected its first black president could possibly have a racial caste system. It's a fair question, she says. But as discussed in chapter 6, you'll see, there is no inconsistency whatsoever between the election of Barack Obama to the highest office in the land and the existence of a racial caste system in the era of color blindness. The current system of control depends on black exceptionalism. It is not disproved or undermined by it. I say again, the current system of control depends on black exceptionalism. It is not disproved or undermined by it. Others may wonder how a racial caste system could exist when most Americans of all colors oppose race discrimination and endorse color blindness. Yet, as we shall see in the pages that follow, racial caste systems do not require racial hostility or overt bigotry to thrive. They need only racial indifference, as Martin Luther King Jr. warned more than 45 years ago. I say again, we shall see in the pages that follow, racial caste systems do not require racial hostility or overt bigotry to thrive. They need only racial indifference, as Martin Luther King Jr. warned more than 45 years ago. We're on page 14, second paragraph. The recent decisions by some state legislatures, most notably New York's, to repeal or reduce mandatory drug sentencing laws have led some to believe that the system of racial control described in this book is already fading away. Such a conclusion, I believe, she says, is a serious mistake. One second. She goes on to say, many of the states that have reconsidered their harsh sentencing schemes have done so not out of concern for the lives and families that have been destroyed by these laws or the racial dimensions of the drug war, but out of concern for bursting state budgets in a time of economic recession. Wow. In other words, the racial ideology that gave rise to these laws remains largely undisturbed. Changing economic conditions or rising crime rates could easily result in the reversal of fortunes for those who commit drug crimes, particularly if the drug criminals are perceived to be black and brown. Equally important to understand is this. Merely reducing sentence length by itself does not disturb the basic architecture of the new Jim Crow. So long as large numbers of African Americans continue to be arrested and labeled drug criminals, they will continue to be relegated to a permanent second-class status upon their release, no matter how much or how little time they spend behind bars. The system of mass incarceration is based on the prison label, not prison time. Let us read this last paragraph into page 15. Skepticism about the claims made here is warranted. I say again, she says, skepticism about the claims made here is warranted. There are important differences, to be sure, among mass incarceration, Jim Crow, and slavery, the three major racialized systems of control adopted in the United States to date. Failure to acknowledge the relevant differences as well as their implications would be a disservice to racial justice discourse. Many of the differences are not as dramatic as they initially appear. However, others serve to illustrate the ways in which systems of racialized social control have managed to morph, evolve, and adapt to changes in the political, social, and legal context over time. Ultimately, I believe that the similarities between these systems of control overwhelm the differences, and that mass incarceration, like its predecessors, has been largely immunized from legal challenge. Wow. If this claim is substantially correct, the implications for racial justice advocacy are profound. One more paragraph. With the benefit of hindsight, surely we can see that piecemeal policy, reform, or litigation alone would have been a futile approach to dismantling Jim Crow segregation. While those strategies certainly had their place, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the concomitant cultural shift would never have occurred without the cultivation of a critical political consciousness in the African American community and the widespread strategic activism that flowed from it. Likewise, hear this, the notion that the new Jim Crow can ever be dismantled through traditional litigation and policy reform strategies that are wholly disconnected from a major social movement seems fundamentally misguided. And I'll read that last one again. Likewise, the notion that the new Jim Crow can ever be dismantled through traditional litigation and policy reform strategies that are wholly disconnected from a major social movement seems fundamentally misguided. We'll pause right there. The reading of this book is to be continued. Please tune in again.